Hi, my name is Stephanie, and I'd like to welcome you all to our webinar today, Moving to ServiceNow London. A few quick notes before we start. Your phone lines are muted, so if you have any questions for our presenters, please use the Q&A panel, and please send that question to all presenters. Secondly, Jeff is doing a demo later today, so please find the full screen mode now for your webinar viewer. This will make it much easier to see the details in that demo. And lastly, I am recording this event, so you will receive an email no later than tomorrow from the same ReadyTalk address that you received your login information from, and that email will have both a link to this recording as well as a link to download the slide deck that was used today. At this point, I'd like to turn it over to Don Casson, CEO of Evergreen. Don?
Thank you, Stephanie. Hi, I'm Don Casson, CEO of Evergreen, and with me is Jeff Benedict, who heads up Evergreen's ITSM practice and leads our innovation efforts. Thanks for joining us today. If you're new to our webinar series, welcome. If you're a past attendee, thanks for joining us again. Our goal always is to share valuable information and insights you can use in your planning and activities right now. The topic we will explore today is moving to ServiceNow London, how to best benefit from it. So here's our agenda. After a very little about Evergreen, we'll dive into it. And beyond that, we'll demonstrate these concepts in a new free code audit technology we have built to help you with your ServiceNow instance. Then we'll answer questions if you have any. Evergreen is a US-based consulting firm, and we've worked with hundreds of mid-market Fortune 1000 companies and public sector organizations to improve their IT service management execution. Over the past 20 years, we've done more than 4,000 service management projects. We are a full lifecycle firm, meaning that we have both process and technology consulting in the same company. We are one of a few top-tier or gold US ServiceNow partners in services, application development, and training. As a certified applications developer, we develop solutions on the platform which must be built and tested to the same standards that ServiceNow uses themselves. We believe the benefit to you is higher quality outcomes. ServiceNow London released on September 12, 2018. Like every ServiceNow release, every 6 months there are hundreds or thousands of improvements. Today we'll focus on the top 3 most significant improvement areas from our perspective: the virtual agent, software asset management, and improvements in human resources. So what can virtual agent do? According to ServiceNow, it can interact with users to open incidents, make requests, ask questions, check status, and perform all manner of common actions in IT, HR, and customer service management. ServiceNow estimates that the virtual agent has the potential to handle 15 to 20% of all routine or everyday interactions across HR, customer service, and IT service management. The use of the Now Platform Intelligence frees up employees and customer service agents to focus on more strategic and personally meaningful work. On the right-hand side, you can see the topic areas defined for virtual agent in the new London release. It's still pretty early for this technology in ServiceNow, so there isn't a ton of content yet behind those categories. Virtual agent is a type of chatbot, and there is some confusion regarding the definition of chatbots in the industry and to what extent they are intelligent. Virtual agent relies on branching decision trees to guide customers to the appropriate outcome. Every step of the way is scripted based on choices made in the previous step. As an example, you can see above a simple decision tree for troubleshooting a monitor. ServiceNow also provides a virtual agent designer so non-developers can design conversational workflows without the need for scripting and advanced skills. Critical to making any chatbot successful is enough appropriate knowledge, or you can even just call it information, to accurately feed the decision trees. Software asset management takes a big leap forward with London. Let's hit the highlights here. Automated entitlement import automates the process of importing procurement data. An extensive content library aids in the normalization process to understand what has been discovered in your environment. Built-in software license calculation intelligence is easily applied to software entitlements without writing code to make reconciliations easier. Boy, that has always been a very tough problem. Pre-built publisher packs for complex server-side licensing for major enterprise vendors like Microsoft, Oracle, IBM, VMware, Citrix, and Adobe are available. With license position reports, you can get a detailed view of the underlying data behind the dashboards, and client software distribution facilitates self-service software and automated license reclamation for the same use case lifecycle. HR also significantly improves. Virtual agent conversations for HR use predefined dialogue to automatically chat with employees who are requesting HR services. Excuse me. The case and knowledge management application allows you to standardize the documentation, interaction, and fulfillment of employee inquiries and requests. The employee document management application provides electronic storage and filing of employee documents. And the employee service center application now provides a single place for employees to quickly and easily get all the HR services they need. So that's kind of the highlights, and you probably have already heard about this in some of the London information because it's out there. But now let's take a look at what are the challenges specifically in keeping up with ServiceNow that affect us in going to the next release. So here are some of the challenges that stand out. Number one, ServiceNow moves really fast. Every 6 months they release a new version with thousands of improvements. And since most companies follow an annual ServiceNow upgrade cycle, that means that you have to absorb the improvements from not one, but 2 releases. Many ServiceNow environments are complex, overly customized, and poorly documented. This makes upgrading difficult and time-consuming, causing customers to fall further behind in the current state of their ServiceNow platform. The absolutely easiest way to get your ServiceNow instance at least technically ready for an upgrade is to follow ServiceNow published best practices. Many have a lot of code that violates the best practices and aren't sure how to find it and repair it. Beyond that, if you do actually want to benefit from the latest release's new functionality, how do you? What's your current state and the gap you need to address to get there? Last but not least, there's usually limited time and budget for upgrades, so many end up replicating what they already have and forego the new innovative value from ServiceNow. This is a real shame, as that is usually the reason ServiceNow was bought in the first place. So how can we go about making it easier to move to London? Over the past 2 years, while working with dozens of clients, we developed a set of automated code analysis tools to help with our own code quality. We combined these tools into one, which we call the Evergreen Instance Analyzer. It includes the functions of the ServiceNow ACE report and a whole lot more. It can perform an analysis of your entire ServiceNow code base compared to the published ServiceNow code best practices. Not only does it identify where you're out of compliance, it gives you a manager's workspace where you can run multiple targeted scans and actively manage your progress as you fix identified problems. It is a free scoped application on the ServiceNow store. In 1 month, it became the #1 rated product out of 418 on the store. We were really thrilled about that. We put our very best effort into making it really good, and it is free. So you might wonder, what's the catch? So here it is. It's a way to introduce Evergreen systems to you, to show you what we're capable of, and our unique ability to essentially guarantee you high-quality code. If you need help building better solutions on ServiceNow and you don't have a great partner, we'd sure like to talk with you. Either way, you still get a great tool for free. EIA is built as an analysis and remediation tool with hundreds of rules it can run today to test specific items. These rules can be combined and recombined into use cases for specific purposes. The current use cases include ServiceNow code best practices, migration from CMS to Service Portal, the ability to target specific code, individuals or teams, and the ability to create your own custom rules. Perhaps you'd like to see how one of your employees is doing and help them to improve more quickly. Or perhaps you'd like to inspect the code of an application under construction today, or the code quality of work done by one of your ServiceNow third-party consultants. All of this is possible today. New today is our London readiness use case to help you make that upgrade easier and get as much of the benefit as you can from the latest ServiceNow release. EIA has an easy-to-use workspace where you can select, launch, and manage multiple analyses at the same time if you wish to do so. On the left-hand side, you can see where you can start a new review. The middle section shows you your active reviews, and on the right-hand side, you can see the high-priority items you need to remediate so they stay top of mind. And from this screen, we can drill down into any of these things. Here are the ServiceNow published coding best practices. It is a body of knowledge with 7 main topic areas and 29 subtopic areas. Beneath the subtopics, there are hundreds of specific best practices. These best practices are continually changing and growing, and they are all addressed by the Evergreen Instance Analyzer. The HTML link at the bottom of the slide will take you to the current ServiceNow code best practices if you'd like to take a look at them. So how do we get ready to move to London? First and most importantly, we must get aligned with ServiceNow published best practices. This is the best and most proven path to making your upgrades smoother and easier. In order to do this, you install the Evergreen Instance Analyzer and run the best practices use case. The EIA will find any code incompatibility or poor practices that will slow you down or make your migration more difficult, so you can then begin to remediate them. Step number 2, if you're on the older CMS instead of Service Portal and would like to move to Service Portal, then you should run the Service Portal Readiness Analysis. Here's a sub-workspace dedicated to that. From it, we can see what needs to be remediated by logical groupings and then drill into any individual recommendation to see the specifics of it in its state of progress. And again, we can also see what needs to be addressed first based on a calculated score of priority. This brings us to step 3, the London readiness use case, which is brand new. With it, we're stepping into a new area of analysis. We all know that technology alone doesn't solve business problems. Solutions are composed of people, process, and technology. It's always been that way. I suspect it probably always will. With the London use case, along with technical readiness tests that the EIA runs, we are introducing some self-service current state maturity questionnaires to help more clearly define where you are and what needs to be done to bridge the gap between that and where you want to go. Then, to make the basis even clearer and more valid, we are using EIA where we can to test the current state of the platform to see if the reality matches the beliefs about current state from the maturity questionnaires. We're pretty excited about this. It's a neat way to tie those two things together. So here we can see the sub-workspace dedicated to London readiness analysis. We can see here the assessment maturity results, the findings by rule, and the high priority items to address based on a calculated score of priority. The Evergreen Instance Analyzer, along with the best practices and Service Portal readiness use cases, are free and available as a scoped app you can download from the ServiceNow store. The new London readiness use case is also free. You need to contact Evergreen to authorize it on your EIA instance. Now we come to step 4. Here's our no-cost consulting best practices analysis offer. That's a mouthful. You install and run the EIA against a non-production environment. Once you have the results, you can schedule a 1-hour call with us where we review the findings from the best practices use case with you and how to best address them at no cost. Again, we're doing this as a way of introducing Evergreen. The other option for step 4, this is our no-cost consulting best practices offer for the move to London use case. You install and run the EIA against the non-production environment with all the use cases that are relevant for you. Once you have the results, you can schedule a 1-hour call with us. We'll review those findings and the options you have with you for your optimal path to London. So that's it for me today. Pretty short presentation section. I'm going to turn it over to Jeff to demonstrate the latest and greatest in the EIA.
Thank you, Don. Let me steal the screen here. So I'm not going to follow Don's slides in terms of order and steps. So I'm going to start with, as Don alluded to, one of the first steps in preparing for any upgrade, London included, Madrid and so forth, is addressing kind of those technical best practices, making sure your code quality is optimized, right? You're minimizing the number of skips that you get on a various upgrade. So I wanted to start with just kind of showing what those technical best practices are. This was included in the slide and the link, but I'll highlight a couple out here so that are part of our EIA application. I'll kind of compare and contrast what you have documented on the ServiceNow site and kind of how that's been put into our application. So if I go under kind of the scripting area, a couple things I'll highlight, or a couple of items I'll highlight in here. So interacting with the database, and various rules have different levels of priority and impact to how they either impact your maintainability of your application, as well as whether they impact your upgradability for the future, if it's likely that something ServiceNow is going to basically no longer support or kind of break or that'll likely break as part of an upgrade. But I'll just highlight a couple of these out here. So for example, this is one I'll show kind of as a rule, the use of things like this get row count kind of function, which by itself is not a big deal, but can be a performance drain if you have a large table you're querying against. Because in essence, the mechanics of this function is it's going to return back all the records in that row when you do a get row count, which if you've got 100 records, no big deal. If you've got 2 million records, however, it's a bigger deal. Right, so there's better ways to do it from a performance perspective, to do things like use this glide aggregate, which is more of a statistical summarization kind of object inside of ServiceNow's coding realm that can provide back counts and summaries and averages in a more quicker, speedier manner. Right. So other kind of examples, just to highlight, so common pitfalls. Right. So one we see quite often in various environments, people, out of simplicity, will say I want to assign this particular work to a different group, so I'll go ahead and assign the sysid of that group as part of my business rule or my notification, right? And then the problem that arises is somewhere along the way that group gets deleted or that record gets deleted. Now there's a reference to a sysid that no longer is valid, right? So there's better ways to kind of code around that and prepare for, instead of using hard-coded sysids, prepare for using things like system properties or use queries or other ways to kind of go after and get that data. So that's a couple examples. So let me highlight kind of how this shows itself in our EIA. So first of all, our EIA application, as Don alluded to, is composed of a number of different rules that are associated to these different use cases. And I'll show you the use cases and the rules here in a second, but let me first kind of highlight. So one I just showed, right, was the evaluation of hard-coded sysids. A lot of these rules get kind of duplicated and targeted at different types of records. So in this case, this is targeted at kind of script include records. And really what these rules are primarily doing are just kind of testing a Boolean kind of answer. Is this record, does it have the presence of this or does it not have a presence of this, right? So in this case, it's looking for, based off of some pattern, something that looks like a hard-coded sysid, and then highlighting where within that code or multiple places within that code that it found those that particular reference, right? And then returning yes or no whether it found that or not. Right, so any of these items is your build, and one thing to highlight here, right, you can write your own rules, develop your own rules, or adjust the rules that we have packaged as well as part of this. But as we're doing that, we can go through and we can kind of test this to see how it works against our various kind of objects or records, right? So I can come in and say, let's test this particular script include. I get a pass rating, right? I could test another record just as an example, and also get kind of pass ratings, right? So I can kind of test and see, is it actually working as I expect. Other thing I want to highlight, as I'm highlighting this, a couple different things here too. One, you'll see on these rule records, definition of classification. So ways of classifying, does this impact performance, your data integrity, your security posture, right, your ability to upgrade. Right, those can be categorizations of these different rules. Also, we can classify these rules as being either error-based or recommendation. And the difference we make there is error is in essence a finding that is likely going to introduce an error in the error log. It's likely going to cause, say, a catalog item not to work in the service portal and not render or not act like you expect it to, right? And then recommendation is kind of everything else. So it's things that are, like logging into or adding log messages in your business rules is not necessarily harmful, but it can fill up the system log and ultimately just kind of add a bunch of noise and data to your system that's not necessarily needed. So it's more of a recommendation rather than a critical error you're going to have. The other thing I want to highlight with these rules is each of the rules can have or has a documented kind of recommendation on how to resolve these particular rules. In a lot of cases, this includes specific coded scripts on how to, what is good practice, what is the better way to write and code these particular activities. And the other thing we can do, and I'll show you this as I go further in the demo here, we can attach different scripted actions. So if I find this issue, go ahead and run this script to go remediate it automatically on my behalf. Those can be defined and attach these rules so as a way to automate that kind of remediation activity. Last thing on rule definition, so we can group these, right? So different best practices or different kind of rule use cases are documented here, right? So kind of define our technical best practices, our service portal conversion analysis, working on one for service catalog quality, and also the London one we talked about, which I'll show here in a moment. All right, so let's go to, move this thing out of my way here. Let's go to the workspace and let me kind of show you kind of how the workspace kind of works. So if I want to start a new review, in essence, I can say I want to click on Best Practice Analysis, Start a New Review. Now, what I want to highlight here is a couple things on this input. First of all, I'll kind of start at the bottom, but so there is an allowance here to, if I want to kind of run this from this current instance, but connect to, say, my production instance or connect to another development instance that I've got, I can run these from this environment, connecting REST web services and run the scans kind of remotely. So that's what this target instance is. The other thing is that the target records, in essence, gives me kind of what do I want to go after as far as my scan. And this is where you get to be kind of, I guess, a little more strategic on what you're looking to do. If you're looking to say, I want to holistically look at all the different tables, all the records that are made up of this kind of rule group, then you do the all applicable. But if I'm releasing, say, a new scoped application and I want to kind of test that application for whether it is kind of clear of any coding anomalies or issues, I can come in here and run a targeted kind of best practice analysis on either a application or a list of applications. Same thing I can do for update sets, and I'll kind of show you this from another angle as well in a little bit. But in essence, testing a given update set, making sure it's clear of any errors and issues before moving it to another environment. And then also I get real specific, right? Maybe I want to go after just business rules that a specific developer has been recently updated, or ones that are associated with the incident management table, right, or just catalog items and their particular kind of rules. I can target the table, target a query that I want to go after, and go after and just test specific records. So after I've done that, I, in essence, will have a kind of review that will come out and it'll highlight to me all the different findings that we have, right? So in this particular case, 165 findings, of which 9 were classified as errors, 156 were classified as kind of recommendations. Now I also it'll generate a PDF kind of output report for me too, which is useful for those who can't get to the workspace and see the kind of interactive charts and data. It gives more of a summary of here's all the findings by those rules, and then more details about those findings and recommendation activities for those in that kind of output report. All right, a couple things I'll highlight on the right here in the summary. Records evaluated. It's one of the things that we do in EIA is we're targeting just configured records, so things that are considered edited or newly created records. So we have different ways of looking at whether a record in ServiceNow is considered out of the box versus not out of the box. And so this in essence represents the total number of configured or customized records that were evaluated as part of this scan. And then we get kind of a finding ratio of those configured records, how many of them on a percentage basis have some sort of finding or issue with them, right? And then configuration ratio is really more of a taking this number divided by the total number of records in all the tables that were scanned. That's kind of a summary metric. So you'll kind of see in here, right, by rule, you'll see breakdown by individuals and updates, and then in essence the top items based off of a priority score. So let me jump to findings, and I'll kind of highlight a couple of those kind of activities there. So first thing to highlight, so you'll see these each have a score on them, and the way we get scores is a couple different ways. One is based off of a given summary, summarizing the number of findings kind of by a given record, and each of those kind of rules can compute based off of its priority level, its effort, and whether it's an error recommendation can get a score. And then further, any given item, and I'll just give you an example, if I go to maybe say a catalog item, you're also going to get what are called kind of additional metrics can be leveraged as well as ways to kind of boost the priority of a score. So if a given catalog item, for example, is ordered more heavily than another, then it would get a boost in its kind of priority given its relevance. And the same thing would go if a server-side script were referenced and utilized throughout multiple places in the code, it would get a boost in terms of its priority level as well. And there's ways to manipulate and adjust those. In any of these given records, you'll see a couple things on here, right? So you'll see if there are, if it's associated to scoped application, that'll kind of be called out in here. If we open in these items, you'll see each of these have kind of bubbles as to where it found issues within the code, as well as kind of how to remediate or act on those particular issues or items. So you can use the priorities, right? You'll see there's a lot of ways to filter and kind of look at what you're trying to get after. If I want to search by just an application, or if I want to filter by individuals who made these updates, I'll have those options in here. Now, one other thing we also have available in addition to prioritizing is you can kind of put some subjective labels or tags on these records too. So I've already kind of done that for some of these. But basically what we do is you define different labels on a given review that you want to kind of give a name to and a color code to, and then you can attach them to any given item on here, which then gives me the option to do things like, in my case, I just want to look at these ones I've kind of flagged as a hot item that I really want to work on kind of first and foremost. All right, so kind of a couple things, one I'll kind of hit on here. So I talked about this in my kind of showing the best practices, right? So the use of get row count. So here's a case where I have a script that has this get row count function being called on line 32. Right, my recommendation here is to use this kind of code, which is using this glide aggregate kind of in its place. All right, so what I would do in this circumstance to fix this code is I'd kind of take my example, go in to edit my kind of script record. Right, I can kind of throw this new function in here and then go find my line where it's doing the get row count, and instead do something like this where I'm saying return I'll say get encoded query. All right, and remove my kind of bad code. So the result should be the same. Go get this record count for this table and this particular query. But instead, its way of delivering that is kind of through this glide aggregate object, which is better from a performance perspective, right? So once I fix the code, I can come in here and say I can mark this as remediated. And then one thing that's going to happen is it's going to go out and test whether or not that is indeed cleared as part of defining that rule. And if it is, it'll mark it as remediated. If it failed again, it'll still mark it as failed and kind of expect me to continue to fix that item. All right, further, so example here, I've got some log statements and some business rules. Right, now this is a case where I do have a kind of remediated action or scripted action that I can kind of leverage. And I want to highlight here, so if I pull up the record, kind of how these remediation actions kind of work. So this is a case if I look at my kind of business rule, I've got some GS log statements in here, GS log statements in here. Not a big deal, but them logging out some records to our system log, but kind of unnecessary in a production environment, right? So to remove those, I can say go run this action, remove the GS logs. And the way this is going to run, it's going to kind of run a background event that's going to go run that remediation action, log it in an update set, and then kind of go back and test whether or not it's been indeed remediated and removed successfully. And so in this case, it's now remediated. Right? If I come back into here, I'll see my code has been updated. Those lines that had GS log statements in them have now been removed from that environment. All right, so that kind of covers, so I'm going to shift gears a little bit here now in terms of, so that kind of covers the technical best practices, kind of your tactical things to do in preparation for, say, a London upgrade or a Madrid upgrade. And so the next thing I want to cover is really our London readiness kind of assessment. Now this is where it's really more strategic focus and looking at, here's some of the new things that are available in London. How prepared are you from a maturity perspective to make use of things like the virtual chatbot, to make use of the HR features or the software automation features or things like Flow Designer in there. Now this one works a little differently, so when I go to start a London readiness review, you'll see it's not asking me for what records to go after or kind of whether this is targeted an update set, but more it's specifically asking me who do I want to include as kind of stakeholders in kind of providing, sending out questionnaires and providing inputs in terms of whether or not we're ready for certain features of London. All right, so the way this kind of works, so I can come in here and choose a few people just to give it something of more than one person of value, so I'll just throw in some names in here, and then I'll hit submit. And should get my record here. All right, so then my London draft record, give it a second to load here, I'm just trying to pull up the form. But basically at this point it's kind of created a draft record that has defined kind of who those users are ready for, kind of associated to our rule group of London readiness. I can still do the same kind of things as targeting which particular records or instances I want to run kind of the automatic discovery kind of scans against. But now when I go and I say I want to run a review, the first thing it's going to do is not go and generate findings and self-discovery, but rather send out questionnaires to those individuals that I've defined as kind of the stakeholders in assessing kind of different levels of maturity for kind of features of the London release. And I can make adjustments to this. So as soon as the user has filled out a questionnaire, in essence, that's been submitted as part of the assessment. But up until that, as soon as it's in this kind of pending status, I can remove the users or add new users if need be. All right, so now what would happen is one of these users, say Joe employee, right, would get an assessment. They come to their assessment area, they can take the assessment, and you'll see this is kind of grouped into some of those areas that kind of strategically focused, right? So are you ready for virtual chat? It's going to ask you questions about kind of effectiveness of this, that, or the other, percentage of users that are using chat, using portals, right? And I'm just going to fill out some answers so you kind of see the mechanics of how this process would flow. Right? Do we use chat, many, average? Right, so they kind of provide some honest answers to some of these questions. So maybe they don't use this, maybe they do use this. All right, let me just kind of fill these in, and I'll just choose a few more answers here. And all right, so then in essence, let's fill out an assessment, and just to kind of highlight what happens next. Right, so if I come back to this, you'll see this assessment's been filled out for Joe employee. So I got 2 more to fill out, but now I have a new kind of tab for my assessments results compiled today, which is really just the one survey, but obviously multiple surveys are going to weight and score effectively. And in essence, this is going to be like, this is a fairly high maturity score. This is an okay maturity score overall, but there's some fairly low ones in here in terms of software asset management and human resources, which really mean there's some things I need to do in order to prepare for making use of these particular features. There may be more effort to prepare for these than there is for things like virtual chat, as an example. So just to kind of also highlight a little further, if I go to one that's already been kind of filled out, so this one had multiple assessment surveys filled out, got my overall rating score, right, some maturity scores for virtual chat, which shows it's kind of an opportunity. Human resources is a slight opportunity, and certainly software asset management is a big opportunity. to make some improvements to get ready for that. Right, and so then some of the findings we're going to see, if I expand this out, are going to be things like, again, this is going to hit on a lot of those strategic features of London. Right, so things like the use of guided tours and service portals, right, the recommendation of let's leverage that new functionality, let's prepare for using the virtual chatbot, right, some recommendations on what to do in order to get ready for using that virtual chatbot, as well as maybe more specific targeted kind of recommendations, like looking at my individual catalog items, looking at their associated workflow and seeing whether or not there are opportunities to move to the Flow Designer as a new kind of platform for doing the orchestration activities of my catalog item, right? Which is really not necessarily a requirement that you have to do, but ultimately things like the Flow Designer are the ways of which ServiceNow is moving in the future, and this would be a way to kind of get on that train, right, and leverage kind of the new functionality, the new kind of developed applications of ServiceNow for things like your catalog items. Right? And the same things for things like human resources, some opportunities to utilize different functions and features are kind of being highlighted in these findings. So that kind of covers kind of the strategic aspect of assessing where you're at, doing some self-diagnosis, and then kind of providing and compiling those kind of findings based off of those two inputs. The last area I wanted to kind of cover was kind of the, I guess you'd call it in Don's slide, maybe the step 5 of this. So I've gone and remediated my technical best practices. I've done some strategic analysis, made a plan of action, and now moving forward on limited features. But now what, right? So I think the now what aspect is kind of going forward, making sure that for Madrid and beyond Madrid, our code continues to stay clean and ready, right? So one thing that we can do is we can, as part of our SDLC practices, we can incorporate EIA into that so that we can do things like if I've got an existing update set that I'm ready to move to my next environment, I can say I want to go run, before I close this out and ready to move it, I can say I want to run a code review on this. That's a good practice. Right, a couple things happen here. It inputs in kind of our best practice analysis, puts in the update set as kind of the targeted activity or targeted record that's going to be scanned, but also registers it as if there's any remediations that are made as part of this review, they're going to get logged in that same update set so they're all together as one ready for move. Right? So if I run this review, it might take a second or two. It's not very big, but it may take a second for the queue to catch up. So it's going to, in essence, go out there, and I think I've got 14 records in here that are ultimately should find about three kind of findings that should come out of here. And I think it's already done. Let's see if I refresh. Oh, there's scan. So basically, I forgot I already had some exclusions on here. But basically, in this case, it would have found findings, right? I would have, in this case, if there were actual findings that need to be remediated, they'd show up in the findings. This would be in an active state. I'd have to remediate those before I could close this out. But in this case, if it is indeed considered clean, all is good, right? It'll automatically move it to a completed state. But also further, if my update set, if I started as an update set and tied it to an update set, it'll also go back and update my update set as being complete and ready for release. All right, so it kind of expects that I'm going to check out my code, make any finding remediations, and as part of those activities, it's going to automatically move it to a kind of a closed kind of state and make it ready for release. So I think I've covered the basis of what I wanted to hit on today. I hope this was helpful in seeing kind of how our Instance Analyzer application works holistically, but also some of the opportunities that it can bring to kind of highlight opportunities to kind of optimize your platform for the London release.
All right. Thank you, Jeff. So if you found any of this interesting, here are some possible next steps. Perhaps you're interested in the free Evergreen Instance Analyzer. It's a scoped app, as we said. You can get it yourself on the ServiceNow store. Perhaps you're interested in the free London readiness use case. You can contact us to authorize it on your instance. Or perhaps you're interested in a no-cost analysis of your findings and recommendations consultation. We'd be happy to accommodate that also. If any of these are of interest, please reply via email to us at marketing@evergreensys.com. And that's about all for our presentation today. We'll open it up to questions if we have any.
We do have some done. And Jeff, looks like they're for you. First one for you, Jeff. If we choose to skip a finding, will it redisplay on the next review?
So it depends. So if we skip a finding, so kind of in the demo, right, obviously I could mark it as remediated, but I could also mark it as skipped, and maybe that would just be to say, hey, I'm okay with this code anomaly existing in my environment. If I skip it, if I run another subsequent review, it'll take that skip into account and basically not record it as a new finding. The it depends part is if I go and modify that record, say it was a business rule that I skipped a finding on, and then I subsequently went in and modified that business rule, made some code updates to it, then in essence it kind of starts the process over again when I make a modification to it. At that point it's going to kind of rescan and reevaluate all the rules, even the skipped ones, against that kind of what's considered a new record that's been modified.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jeff. Another one for you. Can I use the London readiness assessment if we've already upgraded our environment to London?
So yes, so certainly the assessment is set up to where, in essence, we've kind of set up to where you could run it pre-upgrade or post-upgrade, and it's kind of mainly focused at looking at those factors that can grade whether or not you're ready to use some of the features introduced with London release. So even if you've already kind of done a tactical upgrade to London, it would still make sense to look at opportunities to remediate code issues as well as opportunities to, say, optimize the use of the platform, right? And make sure things maybe virtual agent is something you can leverage now, right? And make use of, and just highlight whether or not you have some good practices in place in order to make use of that feature.
Okay, great. Thank you. One more for you, Jeff. Can we adjust the assessment questions and rules to fit our needs and planned ServiceNow roadmap?
Certainly. So I kind of highlighted in the demo that the rule records are editable as well as the rule groups. So if there's certain kind of things you want to go after, build your own kind of use cases, right? You can create a rule group, create your own rules to do that. I will say a lot of our rules and rule groups we've had, came from us working with specific customers, right? So we kind of tried to set up a good working example or working set of rules and rule use cases based off of our experience. But certainly you can go in and adjust the questions, adjust the rules before you run a review, and so that they may properly match your kind of needs as well as your practical opportunities, right? So maybe there's no future of you using HR service automation on the ServiceNow platform. Certainly those sets of questions could be inactivated as part of the assessment.
Okay, great. I don't see any more questions, so I'd like to thank everyone for joining us. If you have any interest in any of the offers that were mentioned, you can reach us at marketing@evergreensys.com. That comes right to me. I will get you in touch with the appropriate person. And as always, check our resources page at evergreensys.com for future webinars and recordings of past events. Thanks so much for joining us.